Namaskar and a very warm welcome to everyone joined in today for our third Know Your Species, Know Your Zoo talk on the Indian giant squirrel and the Rajiv Gandhi Zoological Park and Wildlife Research Center. This talk is being organized by the Central Zoo Authority, New Delhi, as part of the Bharat Ka Amrit Mahotsav celebration. The celebration is a 75-week-long celebration in commemoration of 75 years of India's independence, which is on the 15th of August 2022. The Central Zoo Authority has taken up this celebration through a massive outreach campaign titled Conservation to Coexistence: The People's Connect. In this campaign, we are generating conservation awareness for 75 priority species for a period of 75 and 75 zoos for a period of 75 weeks. Our week 1 and 2 species were the Asian elephant and the rusty spotted cat, which was taken up by the Veer Mata Jijabai Bhosle Udyan Zoo and the Sanjay Gandhi National Park and Zoo, respectively. The species is Indian squirrel, and zoo in focus is the Rajiv Gandhi Zoological Park and Wildlife Research Center. Our expert today for the Know Your Species section is Dr. Nandini Rajamani. A brief introduction about Dr. Nandini Rajamani. Dr. Nandini is a biologist whose training includes a doctorate in evolutionary biology from Auburn University. She has extensively studied giant squirrels in the wild, and her research interests include examining the ecology of species and understanding adaptations and processes. Apart from research, she has been involved in several initiatives to promote and communicate science to students, researchers, administrators, and the wider public. She currently serves as assistant professor at ISER Tirupati, Andhra Pradesh. I would now request Dr. Nandini to please begin her talk.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for asking me to give the talk. I'm very happy to be here. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about giant squirrels, Ratufa indica, the Indian giant squirrel, or also called the Malabar giant squirrel. This is a fascinating species, and in my lab we do a little bit of research on the giant squirrel, amongst other squirrels. So let's get started. To start with, I'd like to say that squirrels are a really diverse family. And across the world, you have 280 species. And squirrels are really unique in that they are found in 3 distinct lifestyles. And let me explain this before we go on. Some squirrels are ground squirrels, and some squirrels are tree squirrels, and then you have flying squirrels. So these 3 different lifestyles of squirrels live very distinctively and differently from each other. So ground squirrels and tree squirrels are out in the day, or they're diurnal. Tree squirrels, as the name implies, are arboreal, but also come to the ground. Ground squirrels, as the name implies, largely live on the ground, very rarely can climb trees. And they don't glide. But when we look at flying squirrels only come out at night. They are arboreal, and they glide from tree to tree. So what are squirrels? We can take a step back. Squirrels, next slide, please. So squirrels are rodents. So they're part of this giant family of rodents, over thousands of species. Rodents evolved about 50 million years ago. And squirrels branched off shortly after that, about 10 million years after that. So the exact date is debated because of the availability of fossils. But what we do know are squirrels are a very distinct group of rodents, distinct in terms of their behavior, but also in terms of their evolution. So they branched off a very long time ago. And within squirrels, again, like I said, you have a number of species, 280. So this is a very large and diverse family. Where are giant squirrels? So we'll go on to look at the squirrel phylogeny. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a phylogenetic reconstruction, which is a relationship of species or genera that are alive today. So I'm not going to go into too much detail with how to understand a tree, but basically all your names on the right side are species, and the lines that connect them depict the relationships between them. At the bottom, you have a color bar with a time scale that you can see. It goes back from the present, which is on the right, all the way to the Paleocene, which is, about 50 million years ago. So when did squirrels evolve? And where are giant squirrels here? So if you look at the red circle, that's your giant squirrels, Ratufa. And the box, the rectangular red box, tells you the two names of the two species in this particular analysis. So if you trace that line back, you see that giant squirrels evolved about 35 million years ago, or that is what we think, right? So give or take a few million, but this is an extremely ancient lineage of squirrels. And when you look across all squirrels, it looks like giant squirrels are one of the oldest squirrels that are alive today. So this is as much as we know. This makes them extremely special, right? So we'll move on to talking a little more about giant squirrels. There are only 4 species of squirrels, giant squirrels or a tufa, globally in the world. So all giant squirrels occur in the genus Ratufa, and the 4 species are the pale giant squirrel, Ratufa affinis, which is found in Southeast Asia, the Malayan giant squirrel, or also called the black giant squirrel, Ratufa bicolor, which occurs in Northeast India, but it extends all the way into Southeast Asia. The grizzled giant squirrel, Ratufa macrura, which is the image on the rightmost corner, occurs in Sri Lanka as well as South India. And then, of course, the species we're talking about today, the Indian giant squirrel, or Ratufa indica, which occurs in peninsular India. So just a little more about these species before we get into some details. As you can see, their colors are very different. They look distinctly different from each other. 2 of them are very light in color. The pale giant squirrel and the grizzled giant squirrel can be grayish, but the other 2 are black, or in the case of the Indian giant squirrel, a lot of red mixed with black. It's a pretty spectacular animal, actually. However, I would just want to say that you might see photos of squirrels of each of these species that don't look like this. That's because all 4 giant squirrels have incredible color variation wherever they are found throughout their ranges. And that's something, that's fascinating. We are not sure why they differ so much in color, but it's not something anyone has ever studied. Okay, so we move on to the next slide. So of all of these 4 species of Ratufa, 3 of them are found in India. So if you look at these distribution maps, these are the 3 that occur in India. You can see on the right side, the black giant flying squirrel is found in Northeast India, but all the way into Southeast Asia, all the way into Sumatra and Borneo. Not Borneo, Sumatra. The grizzled giant squirrel is found in India, but also in Sri Lanka. But when you look at the left, the map on the left of Ratufa indica, the Indian giant squirrel, this is a species that is only found in the Indian subcontinent. Now, these are maps that are largely based on the IUCN distributions, and they are maps that are arrived at based on consensus with discussion with experts who study the species in the field. So as far as we know, even with Ratufa indica, if you take this map, we don't truly understand the distribution of the species. As you can see, there seem to be very distinct blocks where the species occurs. Is that really the exact distribution of the species? We are not very sure, and it's unlikely. I mean, I know for sure there are some gaps in this map, but even something as large and as conspicuous as the Indian giant squirrel is a species that is understudied in India. So there is clearly a lot that we need to learn about this species. So when we look at the 4 giant squirrels, what do we know about them? How are they related to each other? And which came first? Is there a, can we understand which is the oldest of the 4 and why there are only 4 species? Next slide, please. We can do some of these analyses using phylogenetics or genetic studies. Now, there is a study that has been conducted with a few genes, and it's kind of a preliminary study that has been published that indicates that Ratufa indica is closest to Ratufa bicolor. But it indicates also that Ratufa macrura, the grizzled giant squirrel, is a very distinct species. So, of course, these are preliminary results, and we need much more genetic analysis to understand when these species came to India, and did they radiate in India? Did they come from Southeast Asia into India, or vice versa? So at this point of time, we can't say for sure which of the 4 giant squirrels is the oldest species. We do know, however, that, next slide, please. A little bit about the Indian giant squirrel. And I'll start with what is my favorite part about the Indian giant squirrel, which is the map on the right side. So one thing we do know about giant squirrels, the Indian giant squirrel, Retufa indica, and we're only going to talk about that from this point onwards, is that this one species occurs in a huge variety of color morphs across India. And that is fascinating. To start with, the species is a spectacular looking animal with shades of red and black. And people even call it a purplish hue in certain light conditions, and cream, right? And now you travel across the length of the Indian peninsula from south to north, and you see a progressive lightening of the species. But it's not just a lightening, you see different color patches appear and disappear, and nobody has really understood this, right? So how does this species live, and what do we know about it? We know that these giant squirrels are largely solitary animals that are seen in pairs only during the breeding season, or sometimes you see mother and young feeding together, like this is probably a mother and young, or together during the breeding season. You can also see that they are diurnal, they don't come out at night. And even during the day, they are active in the mornings, and there is low activity in the afternoon. And then usually there is a higher peak of activity in the evening. So there's a bimodal peak in activity. How do they live? They construct nests, and this is fascinating about them. Their nests are really large. These squirrels are very large to begin with. They're about 2.5 kilograms. And their nests have to be really large to accommodate their large body size, often sometimes with a young one inside the nest as well. So their nests are really large, like basketballs or slightly larger than basketballs. They're circular, they're called rays, and they're usually made of twigs and leaves. So they're very distinctive and easy to spot in forests when you walk around. We know that they have a breeding season and a distinct breeding season, and it's probable that in the breeding season they build many different nests. And some studies in the 70s and 80s have told us that a female can have up to 7 nests within her territory. How do we recognize them? IUCN lists them as least concern because their populations are doing well and relatively stable overall for the species. And in the Wildlife Protection Act, they're listed in Schedule 2. However, I will say that certain populations of giant squirrels are not doing so well, and they are disappearing in certain parts of the Western Ghats, and possibly in the Eastern Ghats where we don't really know enough about them. Overall, the species is not of concern for conservation purposes. So we'll move on. So what does affect these squirrels? Do they face any threats? So we know a certain number of facts about them. We know that they occur in severely fragmented populations, not just across India, but even within a certain landscape. So as we have development like roads, or other kinds of destruction like removal of forests, you have squirrels being isolated in patches. And because of this, populations shrink, leading to long-term losses or extirpations. But also this leads to other kinds of mortalities like road kills, or killing by dogs, which come when humans come into the landscape, etc. So we do think that giant squirrels do face a lot of threats. Again, these are things we don't understand too well. We also know that they face threats due to hunting in several locations across India, right? So what do we do? Next slide, please. So in my lab, and since this is supposed to be just a short talk, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but in my lab at ISER Tirupati, we study a few different aspects of giant squirrel behavior. So we study basic communication or calling, acoustics of giant squirrels, and we studied response to habitat change. We're also looking at complexity of color patterns and genetic analysis of population evolution. So for this talk, I'm only going to talk about the first 2 parts of the work that we do. Next slide, please. So we all know that giant squirrels have very distinctive calls. Anyone that has been to a forest knows that the calls of giant squirrels are loud. They sound like these toy machine guns that children play with. And there is no other call in the forest that sounds like it. However, it's even though the call is so distinctive, there have been no studies that look at what the call serves, what purpose the call serves. Very few studies have described the call or said anything about how they call or why they call. So Amira Sophia was a master's student who worked in my lab, and she documented call diversity of Retufa indica in Kodaikanal in the Western Ghats. And as part of this study, what did we find? Next slide, please. So basically, we took a whole series of calls that we recorded through passive recorders kept in different forest patches. And then we put this into a software, an acoustic software. And Amira listened to calls for months together, right? So she put on headphones and listened for squirrel calls, Retufa calls, and pulled out just the Retufa calls and matched the notes to see, for us to know how many different kinds of calls can Retufa indica make. And we think there are 5 broad kinds of calls. And there are some calls that are single notes. There are some calls that are really long and very difficult to distinguish. And I can play a file for you about the calls, if you just give me a minute. So when we did this, the next question was, okay, there are 5 kinds of calls, and does the squirrel use a particular kind of call at a particular for a particular function? So do they call in certain ways at certain times of the month or certain times of the year? If yes, can we try and understand the purpose of these calls? So here we have note A, note B, note C, D, and a miscellaneous note. That's what we named them. So does it use note B for a certain function or note A for a certain function, etc., etc.? That is kind of where we are going with this study. And that's the purpose of what we would like to do. I'm going to try and play a file from my computer, and I hope you can hear it. If you can't, please do let me know. So if you heard that. So these were 3 kinds of calls that are made by giant squirrels. And if you didn't hear that, maybe you can visit our lab website and we can upload some of these calls there. Can you move to the next slide, please? So we took this knowledge of what calls giant squirrels make, and we looked to see, and this is a very large data set. I'm only giving you a quick summary. We said, do squirrels call more at any particular time of the day and any particular time of the year? And our summary results say that early morning, 7 o'clock is the most vocally active time for giant squirrels. As 5 o'clock in the evening is the most vocally inactive time. So they call a lot more in the morning on average compared to the rest of the day. However, you find some calls or the other in the forest throughout the day. So the graph on top, the overall diurnal vocalization pattern, shows you this. But the number of calls you hear in the morning is much higher. Then when we look across the entire year, the graph at the bottom is a monthly depiction of numbers of calls. So we said, is there a seasonality to calling? And by this, what we want to get at is we think that during mating seasons, maybe there is more calling because these are solitary animals. How do they communicate to each other or with each other? And how do they signal territory presence, etc., etc.? And we did find that some months of the year have very high activity period. And these are December, January, February. But February is the month with the highest number of calls. July is the month with the least number of calls. And now this might be because there is a monsoon going on and we can't hear the calls, but we somehow don't think that that's the case. We think that this is truly a biological pattern. So we want to use this kind of information that we have on squirrel calling and really try to understand behavior in a much better way. We think calling is a very important kind of communication or signal for a solitary species that has such large home ranges. So calling is something quite fascinating that we'd like to study more. So the second aspect that I'm going to talk to you about, can you please move to the next slide? Yes, is how do giant squirrels respond to habitat change? So on the Kodaikanal Plateau in the Western Ghats, over the last 50 years, invasive timber plantations are replacing grasslands and connecting forests. So as you can see in the graphs, from 1973, you see a lot of light green, that is Chola grassland. But in 2014, you see a lot of dark pink, which is timber plantation. So the landscape has completely changed. And so what was grassland is today forest, timber. Basically, it's habitats with trees, and these trees connect different forest patches. So how does a giant squirrel respond to this? Giant squirrels use trees and like trees, but these are not native species. They are species like eucalyptus or acacia. And our question was, how does this squirrel respond to this kind of habitat change? So Sanjay Prasad was another master student who documented nest use in Kodaikanal. And we decided to look at nests because a nest indicates that a squirrel lives in a particular habitat. Simply seeing a squirrel does not indicate that it lives in that habitat. It might be moving through the territory, but not actually using it. Next slide, please. So a quick summary of what we found. We found that squirrels do indeed use the new habitat, much to our surprise. We found over 200 nests just in timber plantations, and they were spread all across the landscape. We saw that many nests were in eucalyptus trees, 67%, and then in alnus, another invasive species or a planted species, and 11% of the nests only were in native shola trees, which was all a big surprise for us. And then we analyzed each nest to look at what material squirrels were using to build their nests. And an example in this photo below is that they did use their host trees. So when squirrels nested in eucalyptus, they used eucalyptus leaves to build the nests. So all of this shows that giant squirrels are adapting to this change around them, and that we need to study this in much more detail before we can say that we have no need to worry about giant squirrels. These might be populations that are simply transient, but not able to reproduce, not able to survive, and might be, fading out of the landscape at a very high turnover rate. Again, things that we only know from doing long-term behavior studies. Next slide, please. So what do we want to do further? There's a lot we don't understand about giant squirrels, particularly behavior, and it is necessary to follow populations in the wild over long periods of time for us to truly understand response to change and to predict any conservation measures. So I will kind of stop here. This is my 20 minutes and I'm open for questions. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank my lab. I have a very great team of people that do a lot of work. This is our website, gliding-squirrels.in. We also have an initiative on all squirrels of India. I have not put the link here, but if you look for Squirrels of India on Facebook or on Instagram, you will find us. You can ask us questions about giant squirrels over there, and we're very happy to answer. We'll post some audio files of the giant squirrel calls there, so you can listen to what the calls sound like as well. So that's called Squirrels of India. So yeah, so thank you, and I'm very happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nandini, for the extremely enriching talk on the Indian giant squirrel, the biology, the entire history of it. We will take questions towards the end of the session. So I would now like to move on to the next speaker, who is the Know Your Zoo part of the talk, which is Dr. Rajkumar Jadhav. So a bit of introduction about Dr. Rajkumar. Dr. Rajkumar Jadhav is a veterinarian by training with a master's in surgery and radiology. He has rendered his services in various public and private sector holdings before assuming his current charge as the director of Rajiv Gandhi Zoological Park and Wildlife Research Center. His vision for the zoo is for the betterment of infrastructure and upgradation of the amenities to ensure higher standards for animal welfare and management. I would now request Dr. Jadhav to please give his talk on the Know Your Zoo part of our session today.
Thank you, Amriti. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you on this social media platform on the occasion of Bharat Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and under which the central government has taken up the initiative conservation to coexistence, the people connect, and we have been assigned the task of celebrating a week on Indian giant squirrel. It's a day third, and it's a opportunity for me to inform me about my zoo, the Rajiv Gandhi Zoological Park and Wildlife Center. So I will just share my screen. Begin with the history of the zoo. Municipal corporation developed Bishop Zoo in the heart of the city on the very limited land area of around 7 acres. The zoo was typically fashioned during the time of the zoo where the wild animals were just housed behind the iron bars and concrete cages. After the formation of Central Authority back in 1992, the zoo was renovated by the Central Authority in 1995, and as per the directives of CZA, the new zoo come up on a spacious land area of 130 acre at Katraj. The master plan of this new zoo was prepared back in 1996, and ultimately on 14th of March 1999, the zoo was inaugurated and renamed as Rajiv Gandhi Zoological Park and Wildlife Research Center. So we have total land area of 130 acres, which encompasses historical lake. Lake actually is spread on a 30 acre of land area. This lake was built up by mother of Peshwa back in 1750. This lake was constructed in conjunction with the other water body in the adjoining area of waters, and the whole purpose of this water body is to supply water to the Pune city there. And this lake is believed to have habit the very critically endangered species of fish, the Punkias deccanensis. But over the years, from last 20 years, the eutrophication of this water body has occurred, and the critically endangered fauna has totally now wiped out. So now we have developed this zoo as of now on a 40% of the land area where the land area has been utilized, and we have 17 acres for the mammoths and some bird areas. It has, before 1999, there was a reptile section. The reptile park was known as a Pune Reptile Park. It was established in 1986, where we had only 14 pets. And ultimately, at the time of inception of this new zoo, this reptile park was merged within the Rajiv Gandhi Zoological Park. Now it's a part of the this zoo. So this is the existing zoo layout. You can see the arrangement of enclosures. All the enclosures are arranged along the water body, just from its eastern, southern, and western periphery, right? So this is the aerial view of the zoo. Just see the whole land area, why it's been called as a green lung of the city. This land, before the acquisition from the Pune Municipal Corporation, it was in the possession of Social Forest Department, and Social Forest Department had carried out massive plantation drive. But the drawback was the plantation they carried out, it was of a exotic origin, mostly Glyceria, Acacia, and Superbird. So whenever the development activities come up, we try to eradicate it, wipe it out, and we just replant it with the indigenous one. So, theme of display, the existing collection plan represents the fauna of Western Ghats and Deccan Plateau. And the theme of display we are showcasing here is having ecosystem base. The animals which represents forest habitat or forest ecosystem, they are clubbed in a separate stage. The animals from the grassland habitat are housed in a separate stage, and the animals which represent the aquatic ecosystem are in a separate zone. So this is the zoning of a zoo. You can just see the map. The yellow color it indicates the animals which are from the grassland and scrubland habitat. This green color is indicative of the animals which represent the forest
So,
habitat.
sorry to interrupt. Your slides are not changing. If you could just do that. And please put it in the full screen mode.
It's not changing.
No, they're not changing. They're still on the 1st slide.
Okay. Yes, Arundhati ma'am, can you hear me?
No, sir, I do not see any change. Is it alright if we share it for you?
No problem, ma'am. No problem.
Yeah, okay, so we'll share the screen. Please stop sharing your screen, sir. We'll just share it.
I should stop sharing now.
Yes,
Stop sharing.
sir, please stop sharing.
You please change the slides. Yes, Arundhati ma'am.
Yes, sir. Is this fine?
Now you can just go ahead now.
Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah,
Further?
yeah, further. Because already I speak out
Yes.
whatever I wanted to. But I cannot. Hello.
Yes, sir.
I cannot see your slides.
Sir, we are right now on the existing animal collection slide.
I can't see it, ma'am.
So you open it on your desktop and you can just speak from there. We'll keep changing from here. Once you say please change
I
the
end
slide.
the show now.
Sorry, sir.
Yes, got. I
Got it?
got.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, fine.
So this is our existing animal collection. We have total number of mammals species up to 20, and the total number of specimen are 262. We have total 30 species of reptiles with the total number of animals to 157, and total 12 bird species with the total number of birds being 25. So as of now, we have total 60 species and total number of animals being 444. Next, please. Next, please, ma'am. Next, please. Arundhati, ma'am.
Sir,
Next, please.
it's loading.
The same slide is in front of me on screen. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir, we're on the environment enrichment slide.
Because the slide still is not moving.
So we're currently on the environment enrichment slide. You can start on this.
No, it's existing animal collection plan only. My slides are not moving, ma'am. You just keep talking to me, ma'am. You are changing.
I'll suggest that Dr. Jadhav, you open your own screen there and you read out the title of the slide, and Arundhati will keep shifting them. For example, right now we are at environment enrichment slide. So if you want to open it standalone on your computer and you speak about it, and then you say the next slide is this, and we will open it simultaneously.
Okay. So the existing animal collection I just talked about. Now the next slide is the species enclosures. So the species enclosure, this is one of the peculiarity of Rajiv Gandhi Zoological Park, because most of our animal enclosures are very spacious. And the sizes of the enclosures are from 2,500 square meter to 21,000 square meter. For example, for the elephant, we have provided the land area of around 5 acres. So ample space has been provided to each animal species while designing the enclosures so that animal exhibit their natural behavior. So next slide, I'm just showcasing the picture of tiger enclosures, how tiger enclosure it's been developed. Just you can see the naturalistic environment we have provided, the kind of features that the animal can actually have promoting its natural behavior instincts. The kind of vegetation we have actually planted out over there. These are the pictures of sambar enclosures. You can just see the enclosure area is around 8,000 square meter, and the kind of Gandhi we have actually propagated over there. These are some pictures of squirrel enclosure. The enclosure size is around 3,000 square meter. The kind of water logging system so that animal can actually satisfy its behavior, climbing and just running here and there out. These are some pictures of boar enclosure. Now, environment enrichment, all the mammalian enclosures, bird enclosures, and the reptile fields, which we have provided an adequate environment enrichment kind of infrastructure and all those attributes which animals prefers to satisfy their may it be habitat enrichment, food enrichment, physical enrichment, any sort of atmosphere has been appropriately taken care of by designing all the animal houses. Now, in further vegetation, as I said earlier, when the land was in the possession of Social Forest Department, they just had a plantation drive with the exotic flora, but while designing and starting up any developmental activities, we just remove it and replace it with the indigenous one, and that's what we have done while developing all the enclosures. We are now just quickly moving to our animal health facilities. I just introduced about the staffing pattern for the animal health care wing. We have director, deputy director, and veterinary officers with the veterinary backgrounds. We have two livestock supervisors, and animal keepers, and mahar. But unfortunately, the two posts are still lying vacant, and we are constantly pursuing for that. But the posts are sanctioned, and we are constantly pursuing. So hopefully, within few days, we'll have some new energetic officers. Now, Health Advisory Committee, which is we have actually formulated as per the guidelines of Central Health Authority. And whenever there are some healthcare crisis-like situations, we just call upon these experts. We have experts from the nearby veterinary colleges. We have some experts who are actually eminent private practitioners, Pune and from around cities. So that way we are getting their help, technical help from time to time. The infrastructure for the animal health. We have a well-equipped animal hospital to deal with the different issues of animals. We have developed the laboratories, the operation theater. We have basic diagnostic and treatment infrastructure. For example, we have XM and ultrasound machine, and we are procuring digital X-ray machine this year. We have remote drug delivery system in the form of tranquilizing guns, pistols, and flow pipeline, etc., etc. We have quarantine facility for the isolation of sick and injured or some animals we have actually procured from the outside collection. So we have that facility to quarantine these animals as per the guidelines and directions of Central Authority. And whenever we personally require the animal to be isolated from the animals, we do it. We use that quarantine facility. We have crematory just nearby the hospital as in of this area. So each and every infrastructure we have actually developed on scientific lines. And the quarantine facility, these are some pictures of the quarantine facility we have developed for the identified ungulates, candids, and ferrets. Preventive disease management protocol we meticulously follow in our right from vaccinating, identify canids, ferrets, some fossils, ungulates, elephants. So we touch wood, we haven't actually encountered some sort of, some contagious diseases as of now in our group. So this preventive disease management protocol is being meticulously looked after on scientific lines. Periodic preventive screening that is also being carried out on routine basis. We just go for scat sample, and we have very good rapport with nearby veterinary college, the KMP College of Veterinary Science. We allow the students from the veterinary team to come here and to carry out their thesis. So that way we have developed our rapport with the college, the eminent professors. They also visit our group and carry out any sort of research work and just put it in the form of thesis, so that students are also getting benefited of it. Random blood profiling also we do as and when required when the animals are squeezed or they are physically stained or chemically immobilized. Once we get opportunity, we just collect the blood sample, send it to nearby veterinary college or in the private lab. We just carry out and just maintain the database. So staff health training, that is also being meticulously looked after every year, every 6 months. We carry out the health training of all our staffers who are actually deployed on animal section or on a veterinary section, who actually come in contact with the animals. So that way, every precautions when it comes to the health of any captive wild animal, we just meticulously taken care of. Staff capacity building, because we have staff who are actually deployed on animal section are 22 to 23. So see, we have the animal collection of more than 400, and staff actually currently deployed, that is not enough to cater the whole services to animals. So there used to be so many issues while dealing with this managemental issues. So what we started from 2017 onwards, we started under the capacity building measures. We started, exposing our staffers to other groups. We send our most of the animal keepers or kennel keepers, livestock supervisors to the other base zoos across the country. So most of my junior staffers, they have seen more than, they have visited more than 10 zoos across the country, which I haven't so far. So that way, it's a very good initiative we have started, and there is a sense of gratitude among the staffers. Now they have actually changed their mindset. They have become more active and energetic. They also come towards me sometimes and just put up some of their demands. So we could have this and that because I have seen in that and that worked very well. So it's very good initiative we have started, and we are getting the result of it. Now I'm just quickly moving on to animal population management. Animal population management. So population augmentation. We augment the population of our captive inmates through breeding, animal exchange, and to gift. So currently, this zoo is breeding the species like this Royal Bengal tiger, jungle cat, gorse, 490, blackbuck, chinkara, nigga, bonnet macaque, rhesus macaque, sloth bear, spotted deer, sambar, and barking deer, and Indian giant squirrel recently. Now, population control. This is also a very important aspect because most of the zoos, especially when it comes to deer and antelope that are flooded, most of the zoos they are having excessive stock of this deer and antelope. So that way, to control that population, we just adopt the method of surgical nutrition called vasectomy. Most of the zoos they actually hesitate to do so, but we dare. From last 10 years, we have vasectomized more than 100 specimens from this nilgai, spotted deer, blackbuck, rhesus macaque, bonnet macaque, and sambaran. We have succeeded to, even we have practically demonstrated this technique to other zoos across the country. So these are some pictures of the surgical procedure. How do we carry out? We perform the surgeries during the early morning because needless to mention because uh, the ungulates, they are especially the species like spotted deer, blackbuck, they are very prone to capture myopathy. If we carry out the physical listening or chemical evaluation during the hot day, hot part of the day, then it would be very difficult for the animal survival and when it comes to the capture myopathy. So that way we have developed our technique to just perform the surgery in the early morning hours. Now just I am quickly moving to ex-situ conservation training program for the Indian giant squirrel. Indian giant squirrel is the identified species by Central Zoo Authority under the ex-situ conservation breeding program. As you know, Indian giant squirrel, it's very difficult to breed in captivity. The data I have actually collected from the Central Zoo Authority. Right from 2011 till 2019, only some 8 birds have been reported, and out of that 8 birds from Earth. So you can just imagine how this species is difficult to breed in captivity. The current captive population of the species is only 30 across the 11 recognized zoo. So, Central Zoo Authority initially identified our zoo as a participating zoo for the exclusive breeding of the species. Till we started the exclusive breeding, no zoo has started on working on the species. So, we are the first one to begin with. Initially, we had only found a stock of 1 to 2. Until 2015, we did not have any specimen in our stock. And in 2015, we got 2 rescued females. Those animals were retained medical grounds. The animals were not fit for release in their natural habitat. So animals were just retained. And we made a request to Central Zoo Authority. I'm very thankful to X number secretary, the answer. And Central Zoo Authority given permission to procure one male individual from the rescue center in Gadchiroli, the Amte Animal Ark, and we got one male. These animals are allowed to mix, and the courtship behavior we started observing from 2016. And for the first time, the courtship behavior was reported one male and one female out of two, and we reported the first birth. We actually welcomed the birth of first of May 7, 2017. Actually, it was we spotted the young one when it was it attained the size of almost the surviving one. We might have born some time in February or March because we didn't spot it when actually men delivered that pup. So again, the second birth was reported in the month of April 2018. The animal might have actually probably born sometime in February. So it was very difficult for us because female doesn't allow the young one to come out of the tray. That is their natural instinct, what we have actually reported in captivity. And the second birth was a moral booster for us and set optimistic tone for the future scientific H2 conservation breeding program. So then we decided to go for the H2 breeding program, and we set our priorities accordingly. So, first and foremost was the generic study of the founder, then the construction of housing facility, then third one was the relocating all the population, then fourth one was the basic study of basic physiological, behavioral and reproductive study of the species, then focus on augmenting the population and then exchange this progeny born in our facility to other to and if needed then going for the reproduction. So accordingly, we started moving forward. We decided to go for the collection of biosample to send it to the lab. But actually, initially we were in dilemma, which while collecting the biosample, we will have to restrain the animal either physically or we will have to chemically immunize them. So it took some time for us to decide this methodology, which method to be used for restraining of animal because physical restraining was out of precedent was not possible at all. So we decided to go for chemical immunization. But there were no references around for us. No one has actually worked in giant squirrel before. Which chemical immunizer to be used and what dose regimen. They're all actually very big, challenge for us. But we actually decided to go for just using the basic chemical immunizers like ketamine. And we succeeded too. We just formulated our own methodologies and it actually set a benchmark for the others with the use of the basic drugs. We started immunizing one animal after another. We collected the biosamples like blood, scat samples, hair samples. Actually, those were sent to Nepal for the further study. And locally, what we did, we just collected the blood samples, we did the hematology, their biochemical analysis, and just maintain the basic data towards us so that we will have some sort of a data which actually we couldn't see around when we searched references. So then, after sending the blood samples to the Lacons, we got the report after 1 year, and the Lacons, the reports were the animals they found as a fit for the future executive breeding program, and then we decided to go for the construction of housing facility. Already the land area had been earmarked for the purpose. The land area had been earmarked on a northern stretch of the zoo So we started constructing the housing facility from 2019 onwards, and the area of around 200 square meter was identified initially. So we constructed two cages, two paddocks, 45 square meter each, with 6 connecting night cubicles. Right. So this much area is actually enough for the species like the giant squirrel. So the housing facility we come up with, we completed the work in uh, early 2020. So then in the very beginning, we initiated the enrichment activities. We developed tray and some water logging and each and everything, so that the animal will have free access in the connecting night cubicles where the animal will make their movement within the paddock and night cubicles. Then we decided to go for a plantation. So while planting the species of flora, which animal generally prefers in their natural habitat, like Nemesilum undulatum, then Terminalia tomentosa, Terminalia elliptica, Trichitia odiosa, Muria paniculata, and etc. etc. Because we had some limitations within the size of cage at measuring 100 square meters. There was a limitation. So whatever the possible efforts we could, we just taken up. Then we further go for basic study. After the animals were relocated from the rescue center, because before we constructed the HC2 breeding house, the animals were housed at the rescue center. So all the animals, almost 90% of the animals, they have been relocated to the newer facility, and we started studying the basic aspects of giant squirrel. We have reported the poaching behavior early this year in the month of January. On 28th of January, we have actually reported uh, mating activities, right? And the birth of the last birth, the recent birth, has been reported in the month of March. So the best part of this sexual training program is we have every year one per from last 5 years. We are getting one per at least in our collection. But thing is that we are struggling for the founders, so it is now utmost important. The authorities should permit us to go for the production of newer specimen. At least one male and one female will make a further breed to have some heterozygous population henceforth. So also we have actually encountered some health problems in captivity. The dental problems. Most of the specimens we have actually found with overgrown teeth. So that actually needs to be properly looked into. More diagnostic and imaging techniques needs to be adopted. How this problem can be effectively dealt with. Because what happens, we have lost one of our individuals years back. Since then, we meticulously examine, we carry out the oral examination of this animal on regular basis. Mandibular abscess we have also reported. For the dental problems, what do we do? We have actually assigned the task to our staffers. They will just carry out the oral examination routinely. So whenever we report the overgrown teeth, with the incisors, then we anesthetize this animal, we cut the overgrown part. That's about it. The proposed study area under the project. As you know, even that Rajmani Madam also has reported the basic data, basic study about the giant squirrel in terms of the behavior, the physiology, the reproductive biology is still not known, especially in captivity. More needs to be done from here onwards. So we have to invite some education and research entities with us who will work in collaboration with Rajiv and Zoological Park, and we will have some more research data in this regard and so on. So we are welcoming if someone would like to work with us in terms of captive research on Indian giant squirrel, that will be of great help for us. So future expansion and population management. As I said, once we will have a 20 number of individuals, then we will go for the expansion of the facility. Already we have made a position. The land has been earmarked for that. Already we have reserved the land of 300 square meters. Even if it decides to go for expansion of the facility in second phase, we can go with it. But before that, we should have at least some more individuals. Now, quickly moving to next aspect in animal rescue and rehabilitation. Rajiv Gandhi Zoological Park has developed animal rescue and rehabilitation center. It's a part of a zoo on a limited land area of around 3 acres. The facility we established back in 1994 to the objective of to rescue the injured, sick and abandoned animals, to release rescued animals in nature after recovery, and to provide a permanent shelter for the permanently disabled and unfit animals for release. So this is a kind of a facility which was actually very much needed from the perspective of teenage animals overall welfare, because there was no such rescue facility until 1994, and even till now there is no rescue center around in Pune. Only some NGOs, one NGO in Pune, they have started one rescue center in a nearby facility of the land area. But this rescue facility is a kind of a center where we get the animals not only from the Pune and around, but we get rescued animals from most part of the state. So we get the animals either from the forest staffers or from the civilians or from our own rescues. Whenever we get call from the civilians, we send our staffers and rescue these animals. And most of the rescued fauna is from the bird category, the black cat. And even we get calls from the central authority why such large number of rescues. The answer is because no one is working like us here around. And another actually incomings from this rescue center are these confiscation. We get lots of exotic animals through confiscations from the enforcement agencies. So these are some practical information how and how many animals we have actually rescued in recent 7 years. Until 2013, 14, we started actually animal rescue is a number of 1753, 795, 1300, 1738, 957, and the last year, the recent annual rescue operation was around 1659. So permanent inhabitants is also one of the activities we are looking out very meticulously, because these rescued animals mandatorily almost 90% of the animals we rescue we release it back in the natural habitat. Once the animal gets the appropriate treatment, or any kind of a medical treatment or the surgical treatment, once the animal, we find animal is sick, the report is sent to the local forest department, and such animals are immediately released back in the natural habitat. But there are some instances if animal is permanently disabled, if there is a serious sort of injury, or if there gets any orphan individual, it cannot be released back. So there are some exotic fauna which we get through confiscation from the enforcement agencies. Such animals cannot be released, and these animals need to be permanently housed in our lifetime care center. So as of now, we have around 35 species, and the total number of animals are 428, including mammals, birds, and reptiles, which cannot be released back. So, what to do with these animals? That is a big question in front of us, and authorities must seriously think over it how to deal with these animals. Why not these animals to be used for the breeding and for the exchange purpose? That has to be properly looked into. These are some pictures of the our permanent inhabitants, how we do deal with them, how what sort of animal facilities, housing facilities we are providing them, kind of habitat and environment enrichment we carry out. Then let's quickly move into the next chapter. Then digital amenities. With regard to these amenities, we have started the battery operated car facility back in 2008, and online booking service actually we have started with. We have the facilities like RO water facility, free Wi-Fi, internet, toilets and sit outs, etc., etc. So these are some pictures of various housing facilities we have right now with us. Then two rules for the visitors. Visitors, what they are supposed to do and don'ts. That has been properly defined. And the signage are actually put up and at the different parts of the group. We have clearly mentioned about Section 38A of WP, Wildlife Protection Act. There was one instance back in 2016 when one of the person was mentally retarded. He entered in the animal house, but we were lucky enough we rescued him unhurt. But later on, it was a very eye opener for us, and we decided to put him in our pool, the Section 38J, because that animal was that person was put under Section 38J in the local police station. So also we have actually banned plastic for the visitors. We banned it from 2010, and now our school is totally plastic free. These are some features. Now the vegetation and revenue. Graffiti information has been provided here with. We have the total vegetation, annual vegetation up to 16 lakhs 49,000 was the last year, right? Back in 2018, 2019, right? So last year until now, from since 14th of March 2020 till now, this is the growth for the digital because Pune was badly hit for the COVID-19. While education, we meticulously focusing to promote the cause of wildlife conservation towards students to conduct different educational activities towards the year, right from different events for the students and for the school teachers. We organize uh, monthly workshop title an introduction to the zoo, where we call upon the different experts from on mammalian species, reptilians, birds. They give us the lectures for the students, and that way the students actually gets benefited. We get very good response from the schools and colleges for this initiative we have recently started. So these are some features about education activities. These are some publications we have actually recently had. Animal adoption scheme we have started back in 2010, and it's also getting very good response. The ultimate aim was to develop the public empathy towards the wildlife, not to earn the money. People should feel the belongingness towards the wild animals. Merely just conducting these different education activities and etc. That is not enough. You will have to bring the public close to the wild animals, let them feel the animals are their own. So that kind of a belongingness that can be inculcated in the public through this animal adoption scheme, and we are getting such a fantastic response. Now the two master plan, which is very important aspect that needs to be talked on. The old master plan of the zoo was prepared by late Pushpa Kumar back in 1996. And until 2009, the developmental activities of the zoo were going on as per the old plan. Uh, as per the recent directives and new policies by Central Authority, we developed our new master plan in 2009. It was submitted to Central Authority in 2011. It was about approved in 2013. So accordingly, this master plan was divided into four phases, phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, each phase of 5 years. So this is the new layout plan as per the you know recently developed master plan. So these are the phases. In phase 1, we prioritize the development of different enclosures. The enclosure for ninja, enclosure for lion, giant squirrel, jungle cat, rusty spotted cat, leopard cat, and new reptile section. Even though we got the master plan approval in 2013, we couldn't start because of some reasons from the Pune Corporation. The appointment of consultant couldn't happen. Even we couldn't remove the trees. There were some norms and stringent rules for the removal of a tree in short time, and that's why the master plan work was bit delayed. But we started it in 2017, and we developed first enclosure for Ninja. It was inaugurated in the month of November 2017, and thereafter we started this master planning process in a rapid pace. Now we are going to inaugurate 4 new enclosures in the next month. The enclosure for the giant student, jungle cat, spotted cat, and leopard cat. We work for the new reptile section, work for enclosure for the aesthetic lion. It's underway, and that will be also completed this year. So the first phase of master plan, even though we drafted it as 2011 and 2016, but not much uh, has been achieved so far until now because of the delayed master planning process. So these are some features. Actually, I'll just show you how we have developed this new enclosures for the jungle cat, leopard cat, spotted cat, and Malabar giant squirrel. Actually, these 4 enclosures are clubbed, and they have given a shape of question mark. So this is a very fantastic facility. The giant squirrel enclosure is a kind of a enclosure. Actually, first time in India we have developed a G+1 structure. The people will have access to go over. There is a staircase because this upper canopy is arboreal species. Generally prefer to live in a tree top. Once the animal will be up on a tree, it would be very impossible for the visitors to see the animals. So that's why that kind of facility has been provided in the new giant squirrel enclosure. So this is the second phase of our master planning, 2016 and 2021. But as I said, the master planning procedure was delayed due to some reasons. We are still working on the first phase of master plan. So now it's a beginning of second phase. So we will have to take up the work which are pending from the first phase and what actually we have proposed in in the second phase. So there will be the construction of mouse deer, then walkthrough aquatic bird aviary, then for raptors, terrestrial birds, and most importantly, apart from constructing the enclosures, as I said, the water body was believed to inhabit the critically endangered species of fish, the Punches decanensis. So that way, we have actually decided to go for eco-restoration of this water body. We will have a plan to desint it, and afterwards, we will go for construction of islands where we will have a plantation of trees. So it will be one of the attractions for the native aquatic avifauna so that it will attract the migratory birds because the water body being excessively having a size, having a land area of 30 acres. That will be the major attractions for the visitors too. In phase 3 of the master plan, where we will have very work of construction of wild dog, fox, hyena, and remodeling of the earlier construction enclosures. This is the fourth phase of the master planning. The lion tail macaque enclosure, the remodeling of some enclosures we have actually proposed in the fourth phase. Now, master plan amendment until 2016, we didn't move because we got approval just back in 2013, and until 2016 we just keep quiet. But thing is that the earlier master plan, the collection plan which actually we proposed in the master plan process, it was actually representing only the regional and the national fauna, and no exotic species was actually identified in the earlier plan. So we decided to have some exotic species like giraffe, zebra, nyala, game squaw, common eland, and few wild beasts also. The species like alligator, anaconda, radius, terrapin, being one of within the current norms of census authority. Current norms have been changed because there is now provision to have 20%, 25% of the exotic species. But earlier it was a 10%. So accordingly, we just stick to norms and we propose to have new 10 exotic species in our collection, and we submitted the master plan for the security approach, and we got it approved some 1 year back. So accordingly, we have started, mulling this master plan in your perspective. We will have zebra enclosure in the coming year. So these are some new species which we actually for the first time we have collected in our collection plan. This is the Nyala, then Camspaw, then common land, and blue wild fish. So the amended master layout plan will look like this. Actually, we have decided to modify few existing enclosures. There will be modification of existing Inga enclosure, there will be modification of existing summer enclosure, there will be modification in the existing wolf enclosure. All these enclosures were with a excessive large size. So cutting this enclosure into two will have two more species and the kind of exotic fauna we have proposed that will be easily accommodated in the our current layout. So this is all about the Rajiv Gandhi Zoological. I just did it. There was a lot to tell, but actually I just sum up here. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir, for the very enriching talk on the Know Your Zoo component of today's talk that we've held. Now we will be taking up questions. So the first question, we will start with Dr. Nandini Rajamani. So, ma'am, Are you there?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So, ma'am, the first question from the audience towards you is: are the nests that the giant squirrels build only during breeding season or other times as well? And who makes them, the male or the female?
That's a good question. So, as far as what we know, we think that giant squirrels live in nests all year round. So each individual has its own nest. Males have their nests and females have their nests. So presumably they build their own nests. Sometimes they do steal nests or use nests that are available in a territory and make old nests new by adding leaves, etc. However, in the breeding season, we know that the female constructs about 6 to 7 nests. So definitely both sexes construct nests, but females make nests too.
All right. In relation to that, there's a similar question which says that what are these nests made up of, and how does this help in avoiding being predated upon by predators? How do they avoid
Okay.
being detected using these nests?
Yeah, so most of these nests are circular, or they are like balls. So they are round, completely round, or they are cup-shaped by an opening at top. There is usually a very small opening to get into the nest. It's not always easy to see the opening from the ground. The nest looks like a collection of leaves and twigs. So it's usually placed on a branch, circular. It's very thickly, densely packed with fresh leaves, dry leaves, and a lot of twigs. So it's a really intricate architecture, but hollow on the inside. So sometimes you can completely miss the nest. So if it's a very dense tree with a lot of foliage, it just looks like a collection of leaves, like an ant nest, or many leaves or a branch that has fallen or broken. So maybe it's possible for a predator to miss a nest.
All right, thank you, ma'am. The last question that we have for you is that are tree ladders useful for giant squirrels to ensure habitat connectivity in forests? If yes, how and what can be done to ensure long-range dispersal in these arboreal species?
Yeah. So this is also something that a lot of people have suggested for arboreal mammals, like rope bridges or canopy bridges, ladders between trees or ropes between trees. And this is an experiment that has been done in the Annamalai Hills by the Forest Department there across roads. So that giant squirrels don't have to come down to the road. They can just use these canopy bridges to cross. And there are photos of giant squirrels using these bridges. It might take them a while to get used to something like this, but it's definitely something that can help with reducing mortality because of vehicular traffic. So yes, we should be advocating things like this in many more places.
Sorry. We have one more question for you. It says that in Canal, grasslands transform to plantations. Grasslands are transformed to plantations as depicted in your slide. How have giant squirrels adapted to it? Did they originally use the grasslands, or did they only start using the changed habitat because of the tree plantation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as far as we know, giant squirrels can use grassland by crossing grassland to get to a forest patch. And we have seen this in intact grassland shola habitats in other parts of the Western Ghats. And we assume that this happens when the patches are not too far apart. Then giant squirrels can run across the grassland to get to a patch. We also see giant squirrels in isolated shola patches. So, of course, they're getting there somehow and they are moving on the ground. In many other forests, you can see giant squirrels come down to the ground and run to the next tree, especially if there's a gap in the canopy. So it's not that they never come down to the ground. However, these kind of gaps would only be travel kind of habitat, right? That they move through to get from patch A to patch B. Now, instead of bare ground, there is actually a new habitat full of trees. So our question was, do they still just move through from forest A to forest B using the plantation, or are they actually using the plantation itself? And we did not expect to see these results. We are quite surprised that we see them using the plantation themselves, especially monoculture plantations like acacia and eucalyptus. However, we can't conclude that this is good for the squirrels. These might be animals that are pushed out of the forest, and animals that are in poor health because they don't have enough diversity of food. They might be animals that are unable to reproduce if they eat largely acacia flowers or leaves. And I'm not sure they eat eucalyptus. Maybe nutritionally they are not going to be healthy. Maybe this is a transition or something that's a very sporadic thing that happens. Having said that, we saw many nests in this landscape, so maybe they're all failed nests. We don't really know. So we definitely need to study behavior in much more detail before we can conclude that they are adapting. So they're using the landscape, but that's not to say that they're doing well in the landscape.
All right, thank you, ma'am. We have one more question. What is the distance at which canopy bridges should be made over roads? I think this would pertain to the fragmentation that's there of the habitat. So the person is asking what is the distance at which canopy bridges should be made over roads?
I suppose it means like every 1 kilometer along the road, or well, I don't think we know the answer to that. I think it would depend on the density of not just giant squirrels but other arboreal mammals at this site. So these canopy bridges, when they are built, they're used by several species like langurs or macaques or giant squirrels, possibly at night civets or lorises. So if this is a habitat with high species richness for arboreal mammals, then maybe one would consider building quite a few bridges. However, if it's a site where you have very few arboreal mammals and they're very spread out, maybe one or two bridges in key locations would help. So all of this would require some kind of investigation of the habitat and occurrence of animals in this particular habitat before one puts up bridges.
Thank you, ma'am. That's all the questions we have for you today. And I'm sure that people will reach on the page we have shared on our YouTube for further questions. Now we have two questions from Dr. Jadhav. Dr. Jadhav, are you there? Dr. Jadhav? Sir, the first question for you is what are the future conservation plans for the zoo, especially with reference to the Indian giant squirrel and other endemic species of the Western Ghats?
Hello, ma'am. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Did you get my question? Did you get the
No.
question,
I
sir?
can hear you. Just speak loudly.
Okay. So the question is, what are the future conservation plans for the zoo, especially with reference to the Indian giant squirrel and other endemic species of the Western Ghats?
You mean what are the future planning of our zoo with regard to the very of and very of Western Ghats, right? So currently we are just focusing on the Indian giant squirrel from the extrude breeding perspective, and we have planned to go for uh, rusty spotted cat. The rusty spotted cat, only the Sanjay Gandhi National Park is now currently working. It's very difficult to breed in captivity, so why not we assist them? So we have prepared the design out for the rusty spotted cat. We send it to CJ's approval, and we are waiting for that. So once we get CJ's not, we are going to start the sexual breeding program on rusty spotted cat.
So the next question is, what are the punishment activities employed by the zoo for the giant squirrel in captivity? What are the kind of punishment activities that you do?
Yes, we have recently constructed this facility and we have recently relocated these animals from rescue center to extrude breeding house. So considering animals' bigger need, we have just made some logging arrangement, some furnishing arrangement has been made in the paddock as well as in the holding cages. There are 6 holding cages which are connecting one. The animals can actually move freely from one holding cage to another. through the different water blocks, right? So also there are arrangement of drains. The wooden drains have actually put up one each in uh, every holding place. So the kind of plantation we have actually carried out in the paddock, that is from the animals' natural habitat to the extent possible. We have limitations, of course, but to the extent possible, we have actually done the plantation of Nemesalon undulatum, slightly olive, terminal, tomato, and etc. etc. So these are the just initial stages of the executive breeding program. This is the first phase one of the executive breeding activity, and lot more need to be done henceforth. So this is also a learning experience for us. We are just studying from our daily experiences, and we are just coming out with the better results.
Yes, thank you for answering the questions. I would like to now with this we conclude our session, our talk for today and the session. I would like to thank Dr. Nandini and Dr. Jadhav for taking time out from the busy schedule and joining
Thank
us
you very
and
much.
giving us this
Thank
expert talk
you,
on
everyone.
newer species. And I would like to thank all the audience
Thank you
for
so much.
joining in. I'm sure it must have been an enriching experience to know more on the biology and the facility where the breeding of Gandhi is being undertaken at the moment. I would lastly like to tell the audience that as part of this Bharat Kamrit Mahotsav, our week 4 species, which will be next week, is Gaur, and it will be celebrated by Bondla Zoo Goa. And we would request you to do tune in for that event as well by joining our CZA Twitter handle and the YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.